Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas. I'm going to be your host today, and we're going to be talking about strategic team and community management. Now, managing any game community entails a lot of work and focus, but managing a team of managers across multiple communities, each one vastly different from the other, can be outright overwhelming, especially when thinking about how to be strategic and hit certain goals. The good news is, it doesn't have to be. In today's discussion, we approach how to be strategic across multiple communities from a simple perspective that not only caters to each community, but how that helps carry out objectives while supporting your team and even helping other departments within your studio. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey, everybody, and we're back. And today with me, I have Astrid, Rosemarin. Astrid, how are you doing? It's good to have you back.
I'm doing well. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks. It's a pleasure to have you. I'm doing well, and I'm just really excited for our conversation today. But before we do, as I mentioned, Astrid has been here with us once before, actually a couple times. This is like version 2 maybe in a quarter, because you were with us for the holiday episode last December. And wow, that's been a while, but it's also been even longer.
So long ago.
It does. It really does. Like when you look back, you're like, that was like the beginning of this year. And I mean, I guess it makes sense. We're approaching the end of 2023 here. But at any rate, but even prior to that, you were in another episode. It was 285, where we talked about how to humanize your studio and set player expectations. So another great episode. Highly encourage you all listening today to go back and listen to that. And for those of you who haven't and aren't familiar with Astrid, she is the community director at Saber Interactive. And your community team operates on the Saber publishing side and currently working on projects like Insurgency Sandstorm, World War Z Aftermath, Dakar Desert Rally, Wildcard Football, and Teardown. Lots of cool projects that you guys are kind of like in the community trenches, if you will, there. But also, just to kind of recap on your career history. I mean, you were the communications director at New World Interactive. You were also the head of the community team at Evolve PR. And while you were there, before that, you were also a PR specialist. And of course, you've had just tons of experience in communications, in community. I mean, there's just so much you're involved with, and it's just so awesome that you're here again to share a little bit more insight about all of your great experience and everything else. But on the side, because I know things have probably changed since our last interview, like what kind of things do you do for fun when you're not so hard in those community trenches?
We're always in there, boots on the ground.
Yeah, exactly.
I actually recently just moved. My husband and I moved from Montreal to a town outside of Vancouver in British Columbia.
Oh, congrats.
And so, thank you. So a lot of what we're doing is like nature-y things. BC is full of hiking trails and trees and things.
Nature. Lots of nature.
I'm a city kid.
No, but that's great. Sounds like a good move overall, and you're getting out there a lot more and just enjoying the scenery, enjoying nature as a whole. And that's really important to do. It's good to, decompress, and lots of benefits with that. So, well, grateful for you and your husband and that you guys moved over there. It sounds like you're really happy and that you're able to explore a little bit more. So speaking of exploring, we're not going to do too much more exploring with the Q box around because, we just really want to get right to the meat of the conversation today, folks. But if you are interested in what Astrid's, responses were in the first episode that we interviewed her in, you can check out her Q box around answers there, either on the show notes or, again, just check out episode 283. And that was where we discussed how to humanize your studio and set player expectations. But despite us not necessarily doing a full Q-Box round, we will ask the staple question here on the show, which is, what game are you playing now?
Right now, I don't know if this is going to like completely embarrass myself, but right now, probably the game that I play the most is Pikmin Bloom on my phone. Possibly I gave that answer before. I also have Persona 5 Royale loaded up on the PS5, but I haven't started it yet. So technically, I'm not playing it yet either. And then I will also just plug the fact that all of the games we mentioned, I play along with my team, and also some unannounced games that we play.
Awesome. So quite a lineup there, but it sounds like your one go-to is, was it Pikmin Blue?
Yeah, I just use my phone all the time.
Fair enough. Hey, nothing wrong with it. As long as you're playing, I feel like I still need to make more time for games and stuff, but I do. It just, there's always, my problem is I start playing them and then my kids are like, I want to play. And then I don't get to play. So, and I think I said blue. I meant Bloom, but.
Bloom. Honestly, it's a glorified step counter, but it's fine. You collect little badges and it's very cute.
Oh, that's another one I need to. I know there's so many, but at any rate, well, thank you for sharing that, and you know what you're dealing with. But let's get to the heart of this conversation here, where we're going to be talking about strategic team and community management. Because you know, in the past we've talked about like community management as a whole, and we know it's a pretty popular and vastly covered subject in the industry, but we haven't ever really got down into the strategic aspect of it. Especially it's so great to have you on the show with someone in your role as a director and leading all different community managers. And I mean, there's, I would imagine, a lot of moving parts there. So to kick things off, I'm really curious in terms of like, how do you communicate and reinforce your goals to community managers while ensuring that their activities align with the overall community?
That's a really interesting question, I think, because we deal with so many different games in like completely different genres. For example, so Insurgency, Sandstorm, and World War Z are similar-ish in that you know you're shooting people and or Zeke, so that's like similar kind of gameplay. But then you have a game like Teardown where it's a physics-based destruction, creative, sandbox, everything type of game. And then you have a game like Dakar, which is almost a racing sim. It's a very realistic car, motorcycle, you know, quad, ATV type driving simulator in the desert. And so you have so many different types of games. Naturally, you have a different kind of player base for every single game that we cover. And so you want to cater directly to them. But at the same time, ultimately, going back to exactly what you asked, my core goal for my entire community team all the time, forever, is engagement. At the end of the day, it's the only thing that we can control ourselves. We can't control the update cadence. We can't control what gets fixed or not fixed. We can communicate back and forth between the players and the developers, but at the end of the day, engagement, making the players feel listened to, providing a place for the players to hang out and bond with each other, regardless of the gameplay itself, that's what we can do. And that's through creating the spaces on the social sites and the community channels, and then engaging with them and being alive, basically.
Yeah. No, I love that you outlined that, because we can probably really get, overthink or overwhelm ourselves with what could potentially be done with a community as a whole. And especially when you're managing multiple communities. So just having that one line, that one focus objective of just keep the engagement going. Because like you said, I think so much important such an important point that you made there was, out of all the things that we can control, this is the one we can't, or we can't control. This is the one thing we can. And
yeah, and at the end of the day, even if it's a multiplayer game that is not receiving updates anymore, if the servers are up, there's still a player base there. There are people enjoying the game as it is, and we can do things with them if we want to.
Yeah. But no, it says a lot. Like, you're right. There's still a player base and there's still opportunity to engage. And I think that could carry well beyond the community too, potentially. Because if people see it, if players see it, wow, it's still an act. It's not dead. It's not a dead game, right? Like, that's a term that we see all the time. The community behind it can make a big impact in terms of that player base or other factors. So great point there too. So with all these things in mind, because I want to kind of dive in a little bit to kind of like, let's say, community strategic objectives and things along those lines. Because, even though we can simplify this as saying engagement, there's still probably some other elements too that we want to focus or hone in on a little bit more. So in particular, what strategies do you employ to prioritize activities that directly contribute to both short-term goals and, let's say, long-term community growth?
I think there's probably two sides to this. One side is the numbers side, and the other side is sentiment, just straight up understanding how everyone's doing in the community. And so I'll say that this is very much a work in progress for our team, and it will probably always be a work in progress because things change so often. But essentially, a core strategy is reporting, be it internal reporting within Sabre and or just very casual reporting with me. And with the rest of the community team, the Marcom group, whoever it is that's a stakeholder in whatever game we're working on. Because the first step is understanding what the landscape looks like. So when I say casual reporting, like sometimes I literally just ask any given community manager, is it a thumbs up, thumbs down situation? Are we middle thumbs? Like, people happy, angry, is it? And then in other times, it's like pulling together multi-slide reports full of sentiment and numbers and analytics and whether or not we are seeing drop-offs or increases anywhere. And so the type of report, of course, changes all the time. But we are trying to make it a little more standard across all the games because we are working on a ton of games and there are more games coming in 2024. And so we really need to be a little more efficient and streamline things so that nobody is overwhelmed. So the last thing we want is an overwhelmed community manager who's unhappy because that's bad. No one wants someone on their team to be unhappy, of course. So reporting is one. I think that's a big part of it. And then the other part is not having cookie cutter responses to things. So if a community manager says that their community is unhappy for a reason, we have to dive into that reason specifically. And how do we respond to it? How do we go back to the development team? What are we looking for in terms of solutions? What are the players looking for? These are all things that even if our communication style outward becomes very similar from game to game, depending on the situation, often the steps that we're going through to evaluate what we do and how to respond to the community, it takes wildly different turns because we're dealing with different stakeholders and also a different use case. Something could be broken versus an intentional decision was made versus who knows what else. And so, You just want to customize everything that you're doing. Bespoke. This is bespoke community management.
Now, real quick, I'm curious. You mentioned like customized solutions to address as opposed to cookie cutter. What would you say are some examples of cookie cutter? Would it be like a kind of a broad boilerplate where, oh, we understand when we're working on it? Or what are some other like types of examples you could provide that sometimes we might default to?
Cookie cutter is essentially if you are not taking context into account. And
Okay.
so you have something coming in, a piece of information coming into you, and you say, this is the thing that we do in this situation. No matter what makes this situation different from the last situation, when this comes up, when X comes up, Y is the response with
Mm,
no ifs, ands, or buts. For me, the key to everything is to look at the context and see how we can address that unique situation. And I will point out, every community manager is a different person with their own voice and their own communication style. And so it's really up to them to decide how best to communicate the general point that I am trying to get across through them. And they contribute a lot to that. So typically, when we have a message that needs to go out to the community manager writes it because ultimately they're the one that's doing this communication and they're the one who is in that trench, for example. And I'm really just nitpicking on words and language and grammar, and maybe they are saying something, maybe it's read by an outside person
mm.
differently than what they intended. And so I'll like nitpick on that. But for the most part, everyone's writing their own copy.
Yeah, and that's I think that's really great too, because I think sometimes when we look at, let's say, a hierarchy, right? Like, oh, you're the director, and then there's managers and so forth. It's more so of kind of like providing a direction, but still allowing them to have that agency and freedom to kind of like, determine these things or speak, like you said, speak in their own tone, voice or whatever, because that's what's going to resonate. It's not like corporate speak, for example, that won't probably work at all or resonate well with the community.
No, yeah, and we're not robots. None of us are robots. It's important. We've had some communities who have bombarded us with Discord comments over the weekend, and honestly, all it really takes is a message in there to say, "Listen, it's the weekend. We're not working. We'll come back to this on Monday or Tuesday, whenever we're in, if it's a holiday or something." And they get it. They're adults for the most part. It's like they understand, and you just have to explain that to them.
Yeah. And folks, if you want more tips and suggestions and ideas on how to address and set player expectations, you go back to episode 285 with Astrid there. Sorry.
Settle, settle.
I had to make that plug again, guys. Sorry. At any rate, no, really great points there in terms of like, really giving not just the setting expectations part, but really giving your team that level of control and stuff, and not because hey, we all know micromanaging can be a problem and stuff, and it doesn't allow
Oh,
things to be so fluid.
yeah, that's it too. You have to be really we have to be flexible and move on our feet because these things change in an instant.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, I'm also really curious too, with being flexible and things like that. Like, how do you facilitate collaboration between community managers, but also like other departments within the studio, let's say such as marketing and game development, to kind of like, optimize results as it relates to community or growth initiatives that you have?
I think a lot of ways. So every time I've interviewed to hire people, collaboration and teamwork are the two things that I'm really hammering home. Even in as early as that interview stage, I'm making
Mm,
sure that literally every person who I am working with is on board for that concept of collaboration and teamwork, because all of us cannot operate doing our jobs in a vacuum. We all depend on each other, and it's just so important. So there's a lot of ways that we do this. My team is remote. We're all in different places, different time zones. And so we depend a lot on asynchronous communication through text, as in like chat apps and things, email, but also meetings. And I know meetings are contentious, but to me, it is a fact that we don't have an office to hang out in. And so we don't have those quote unquote water cooler moments, or I can't just roll my chair over to someone's desk or something. And so every day for around 15 minutes, although sometimes they go for as long as anyone wants to hang out, it's in the calendar for 15 minutes. We have a community meeting, and it's just a sync. Sometimes we talk about food and movies. Sometimes we are talking about tasks. Ultimately, it is a place for people to be unblocked. I am in there every meeting. And if anyone is blocked by anything, that's the best time to bring it up, because I'm for sure in that meeting, and like 99% of the time. And it's meant to be a working meeting. So if someone brings up an issue, we tackle it right then and there in the meeting itself. So we do that, and that's within the community team itself. And for some of them, we have invited members of the support team so that they can hang out with us, because we do a lot of a lot of our work flows in and out of dependencies with the support team, essentially. And also people from the marketing team are invited to join those as well. So they could, if they wanted to, the brand managers could join in, or, brand marketing directors and anyone like that. We have a bajillion chat channels at Sabre on the publishing side for bringing together all these different departments of PR and communications and brand managers and marketing people and creative people, and the developers are in many of these as well. And so producers and release management, like we have all people and departments, QA represented in these channels. And so we can, and they're usually based on game or some other purpose. And so it's really simple for us to just ping people and say, we need something or we don't. At the end of the day, and then we also have a regular marketing meeting, which is for the whole Marcom department, marketing communications, where we, again, are syncing people up. So yes, there's a lot of meetings, but also at the same time, they are purpose-driven and they are meant for collaboration to happen. And more often than not, all of these meetings, there's a ton of productive work that happens as a result of them or through them. So I think they're good. I would say the other piece of it is asking questions. Literally anytime someone has a comment or an issue, just ask questions. What are you blocked about? Does this actually impact us? What solution are you looking for? Who do you need to talk to fix this? Or I can point them in the right direction of who to talk to. And, at the end of the day, everyone has themselves.
Yeah. I mean, I love how you broke that down from internally with the team, but all the way to, how that process helps promote that open level of communication with the other departments and everything else. And it sounds like it's just a really good framework to work from, because everybody has this understanding, this cadence and everything else that's well established. Because, like you said, if we're not on board, even from the initial interview with the whole collaboration process, and the rest of the team isn't familiar with that, it just makes probably addressing, like you said, that process of asking questions, it can make that process even harder to do without those other things established from a collaborative perspective. So thank you for bringing that down, because, I mean, well, it sounds very simple. I think sometimes it take a lot of work to get to that level and to get to that understanding of how this flexibility between different departments and that core understanding can really fuel a lot of beneficial things. Because like you ended there, like, hey, we have lots of meetings, but they are very productive. And I know a lot of people out there probably are like, okay, why do we have to have another meeting, right? But if it has purpose, intent, and is a simple focus, then there can be productive meetings, especially in this case.
Definitely, especially when you have so many different people involved with making a decision or moving forward with a plan, and you want to get everyone all on the same page. You want to just, there's so many rooms, there's so much room for misinterpretation when it's an email or a big text chat or something like that. And sometimes it's just better to hop on a call and chat it out. People can ask questions in real time. You don't get bogged down in 50 questions or whatever. I maybe it's just I'm chatty and I like hanging out with people, but I find them really beneficial, just talking everything out.
Awesome. Well, I want to shift gears a little bit and kind of talk about, ways to measure community success. Like, what does that look like, right? So let's just start with metrics. Like, what metrics or indicators do you guys use to measure the success of, the communities that you manage, and what are your efforts amounting to? Are they meeting these goals? Are they meeting these metrics, these KPIs? What exactly are you looking at to measure some form of success in this way?
This is an interesting question. I will say again, our reporting is work in progress. So that if you were to ask me this question in a month, maybe might be different. I am trying to balance the easy to collect, but potentially less impactful numbers like vanity metrics, which can still have their uses, followers, views, engagements, all of those fun ones. So I'm trying to balance those, which are pretty easy to collect, with more robust or impactful ones like sentiment. So for us, we just signed up with Player XP, and so they have their own metrics related to sentiment. So we'll be using that for some games. We don't have it integrated with every game. And so that'll provide its own challenges in terms of having certain metrics for some games and not others. But at the end of the day, it comes down to, for me, it's going to sound really goofy, but are we in a thumbs up, middle thumbs, or thumbs down situation right now? Because we don't have to hop into like, oh my God, there's an emergency until everybody's thumbs down. Middle thumbs, it's like, okay, yellow flag, maybe paying attention to something in particular. But if everyone's honky-dory in the community, part of me doesn't really care about what the numbers are saying because everyone's happy, things are stable. I'm not responsible for sales. The community team is not responsible for sales. And so things like that aren't drivers for what we're doing with the community. And so at the end of the day, if sentiment is positive, we're in a good space. If sentiment's not positive or it's tanking for some reason, that's when we have to jump into action. And so it's less about tracking numbers and more about understanding where the community is at. And at some level, that just means the community managers have to be around. They have to be in the channels, engaging with the players, chatting, watching, whatever it is, to just understand sentiment. So that's one piece of it. That's probably the core of it is gut feel combined with all the metrics, which is gut feel is not a measurable thing.
But it can be a very helpful indicator. And I mean, with everything you said, I mean, let's face it, not everybody has really detailed analytics and everything else. And you know, I think it's great that you even outlined that because it is true. At the end of the day, it's about sentiment. And I, sometimes people may be like, oh, I wish my community was bigger, or I wish we could kind of do these things. And, like they kind of say, the devil can be in the details. And what are you really focusing on when you can become so concerned with some of this, the minutia or the tiny little things that, what are they really adding up to? And again, it kind of goes back to what you kind of pose your team with, is like kind of like asking questions about things like that. And like, well, what does that really mean? Is that really a focus? What is the focus? And I love how you then simplify it again and just saying like, hey, sentiment, thumbs up, thumbs down, or in between. And okay, now let's start exploring this a little bit more. Because hey, data analysis, all that information could be extremely helpful for a certain objectives, but a lot of it's like they're little things. And over time, they have a compound effect towards other objectives, other goals. Of course they do. But when you're in the heart of these things and everything else, what does it really matter? What do players really want to get out of these communities? They want to have a healthy, fun space and not a bad, toxic one. So how are you making that work?
Well, and at the end of the day, this relates back to what we were just talking about with collaboration and teamwork, in that much of our data-driven reporting is to help other departments and to help other people in the company with the work they are doing. So for example, say we put out a trailer that gets reported on by the whole marketing team out to other stakeholders, then including like leadership at the company and what have you, then the numbers, the view counts and the engagement counts and all of that matters in the context of that report, because it's a holistic sort of take on the performance of this trailer, for example. Whereas those numbers don't really have an impact on our day-to-day in the community activities, because if announcement trailer gets 50,000 views versus 100,000 views, it doesn't really change what we're going to do related to that trailer. We still have to post it and make sure people are replying and engagement. That's all the same for us, but collecting and reporting those numbers matter to other people. So that's why we do that more often than not. That said, there are numbers for us to track to see if either engagement or sentiment are going down. And those would be super relevant to the activities that we do. So it comes down to also working within the sort of the structure that exists beyond our little community walls to support everyone else. Work.
Awesome. No, and thank you so much for providing that example, because it's another good one. So, sometimes it's not necessarily all about, hey, hard numbers or whatever data you can collect for the community itself. It's like, hey, how can the community now help support the rest of the team in whatever department that may be? So if you have a large studio, a publisher that has lots of departments, or it's just a small team, at least now you can, I think how you pose things was a really good way to look at it from a different perspective, and how the community can support and infer other decisions made elsewhere. So very good stuff there. Well, I know we're coming on time here, and really appreciate everything you shared. But before we get going, from everything that we discussed, which was a lot, what would you say are a few tips or suggestions that you would give to anybody, whether that's managing a community or directing a community or whatever their role is? What tips or suggestions do you have for our listeners today?
I think a big one is to consider the individual case that you're in. Part of the reason why developers especially indies, struggle with social media and community is they look at what has worked or not worked for other teams. But at the end of the day, so much changes with every single campaign and situation that it's very difficult to replicate anything that someone else did. So to be a little more specific, just so everyone understands what I'm talking about, if a team has a really strong concept artist, then maybe you want to focus on the more visual social platforms like Instagram, even ArtStation, doing one picture on Twitter instead of the little 4 quad or something like that. Not Twitter, X. But then in another situation, if someone on the team is really into making short form video, then maybe you want to lean more to talk and whatever. And so where you're growing your audience, how you're building community is different depending on what your skills and strengths are on your team, not necessarily what worked for some other team somewhere else who had different skills and strengths. So that's one thing I would say. The other thing is that I think it's extremely common still to this day for indies to hire a quote unquote marketing everything person. And now more than ever, I would say that's not tenable. So it's about understanding what your must-haves are when you look to hire this person, especially if you in this case is studio head or something like that. So I personally would recommend that it is, this is going to sound very biased, but I'm saying this as someone who's been on lots of sides of this conversation. I think it's important to look at what you can do full-time in-house, as in, is this person just running your social media accounts? And then maybe something like PR you are outsourcing to an agency or a contractor in the very specific times that you need to do media outreach. Or maybe you have a game that really speaks to content creators. And so your in-house single person is focused predominantly on content creators and then a bit of light other things somewhere else. The single-handedly running an entire marketing team of yesteryear, which happened a lot, a decade ago in the indie space, the ecosystem has changed so much, especially post-indie-pocalypse, whatever that was at this point. It's not tenable for one person to do all that. It's pretty much impossible at this point. And you'll burn someone out, and then they'll be miserable, and then they will talk shit about you in Discord servers.
And that's never a good position to be in, folks. But I mean, the reality too, though, is simply this: is just you can't spread yourself too thin. And even though it might sound a great solution, one person to do it all is never going to be probably the best solution. It could help. It could maybe alleviate things. But for the long term, it can be very challenging if those things happen. And like you said, you've heard it a while. It's kind of been the mantra in the past, so to speak. But it can put you in rough situations. So good point there.
And then my final one, I would say, is this kind of speaks to everyone, I think, who is in a management or leadership position. But I am a big believer in empowering your team and your staff to do the things. Often they have extremely good ideas, and they probably have better ideas than you do because they're the ones on the ground doing the stuff in the first place. And so listen to them, allow them to put their plans into action, ask questions to try and poke holes and sort of do it in a way to strengthen what they're doing and their plans and their strategies, as opposed to tear them down or anything like that. But it's all about building them up, because ultimately all these people who are quote unquote below us on the pecking order, at some point they will be equal to and or above us as they sort of gain experience and rise up through the ranks in the industry. That's pretty common for someone who, like, I know people who were interns and who are now senior whatever at big studios and blah, blah, blah. And so it's, you don't know where people end up. I think it's all about allowing and encouraging everyone on your team and everyone that you work with to do the best work that they can, that they're happy with. And it also ends up reflecting better on you as a leader and manager, and it produces better work for the community, makes them happy. So it's win-win all around.
And I just love kind of the mindset that's baked in there too, because it's like looking at it from a perspective of, hey, what if at some point this person, this colleague is at the same level or above me? Let's say they're my boss. How
it could happen.
Yeah, like how would I want that person to treat me now? And for some people that, I mean, all across any business, that can be a upsetting and uncomfortable situation sometimes, right? But if you always gave, if you always empowered them to share their ideas and to do these things, and now they're above you, what do you think that working relationship's going to look like? How do you think you're going to be able to do your job and feel good about your job and everything else, knowing that, hey, I have this awesome relationship with this person, and actually maybe the reason why they're there was because of me? I mean, how rewarding can that be too, right?
Yeah, and sometimes it's not even that clear, but it's a relationship thing where I've definitely been in positions where I worked with or around someone and they were newer to the industry than I was. And then later on, they got a job that was in a more sort of essentially more powerful position where I was at a studio and they were at a publisher, or they were running biz dev and I was not. It's like often people move around in cool jobs, and it's way cooler to celebrate someone's awesome achievements than like be scared for your career because you were an asshole or something.
Yeah, absolutely. But in addition to that, it just promotes so much more results, collaboration, and growth, like in various ways outside of objectives or relationship building. There's just so many better ways. So I love that you shared that one for your third one, because it's a good one. We should always look at ways to empower other people, your team, because I'm sorry, it's going to sound cheesy, folks, but by doing so, you'll make the world a better place.
That's it. We have to make the industry a better place every day.
Yep, 100%. Well, Astrid, I can't thank you enough. But before we go, we need some links. We need some, are there ways people can reach out, contact you, follow you? Give us some links.
Yeah, probably. I'm on most of the social channels. Probably the most consistent ones are Twitter and LinkedIn, which are my name, Astrid, Astrid, Rosemarin, Rosemarin. I have an email address, which you can send me a message on the social media sites to find it. And then I think it's going to be in the description here anyway.
Yep.
But I'm kind of generally around. I don't know.
Cool.
I'm on the internet. I'm the only one with my name, I think, and so I'm pretty easy to find.
Oh, and that definitely makes it easy. And but yeah, if people also want to check out some of the cool games that your team is working on, and even other Saber games, what's the website for Saber?
Saber.games. Isn't that a cool URL?
Yeah, it's simple. There you go. Well, nice. Awesome. So folks, if you want to reach out, connect, talk, whatever, Astrid said she's on Twitter, and just it's her name. So go find her if you want to reach out.
Easy.
Awesome. Well, Astrid, can't thank you enough again for being here today. It was such a great pleasure and honor to have you back and talk with us a little bit more about some of the cool things you do with your team. So thanks again.
And thank you for having me.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saw for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.